Hello and welcome to this ExchangeWire interview. My name is Lindsay Rowntree and I am COO at ExchangeWire. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Alex and Peter, who are co-founder and CTO respectively of Skyrise. Alex, Peter, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Great to have you here. I think you are our first two-person joint interview in the ExchangeWire office, so exciting times. And today we are here to talk about why telco data is the hidden giant of advertising. And I think that, telco data sounds very, very rich, lots you can do with it. Feels like it's not talked about very much or maybe not used as much as it could be. So I want to understand kind of what the opportunities are, what the challenges are, and really get to grips with kind of how important telco data could be for advertising. So let's kick off with a kind of grounding question of why is telco data so valuable or can be so valuable to advertisers?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think I might sort of take a step backwards.
Absolutely.
Peter and I have got a bit of background. We once used to work together for one of the major mobile networks looking at the data. And it had a bunch of applications in things like really understanding the population at large, because telco data, there's three of them, well, four actually in the UK, huge numbers of subscribers, which are basically constantly connected through our phones around location and what we do. And I think the reason why we call it a sort of, a bit of a hidden gem, if you like, is when we were first working with this, we found it difficult to find an application for that data in media, simply because there's no IDs. This is something we think is like a strength, a virtue today. It's all anonymised, it's always aggregated, but you had an industry which was like, tell me about the individual, hook it to an ID. It's like, well, we can't do that. So it always felt like, well, that's not quite the right thing, not as powerful. And we'll elaborate more in this, within this session here. But as things have developed, and it's not just because of the death of the cookie, not just because of a lack of IDs, is you start to understand that really, rather than trying to target the individual, you can target the behavior, you can target the cohort, you can target like the congregation of an audience in terms of how they live, how they move. And what better way to do that than something that's continuous, always on, huge sample size. But still, I think we're in some of a transition from the old world, ID based and so forth, to I think a newer world, which is to say really talking about at aggregate, talking about your audience in terms of who they are, where they are, what they do.
That makes sense. So I would like to understand, let's assume that there's not as much understanding of telco data and its values as there should be. What are we talking about when we're looking at telco data? Like, where's it coming from? How are we making it data compliant? What are the things that advertisers need to understand about why it's so valuable in today's world? They maybe didn't want it and they poo-pooed it kind of years ago when they wanted the ID. Now that's not quite as easy as it used to be. Why is telco data so valuable in this current world that we're living in?
Do you want to talk about the data?
Sure. Well, as Alex said, it's a huge sample size and it reflects real world behaviour. So with some consolidation in the telco industry, 3 or 4 main players, so we've got virtually 25% or give or take a couple of percent of the population. And, we hardly ever put our phones down now.
True.
So it's a reflection of everything we do in life, coupled with the fact that it knows where you are. Then that gives us geography, and it gives us context, and we turn that into sentiment.
What makes telco data unique versus other data sets that are out there that are being predominantly used at the moment by advertisers?
I think actually, I might slightly contradict this because it's not entirely limited to telco, but there are data sets, and actually you might say that as well as telco, maybe debit credit card might be a good example. The key thing is you've got data sets that exist at scale and are in continuous use. That's the key thing, as opposed to, well, let's just say cookie, for example, which is an individual piece of data. It's quite short-lived. It's quite a sort of momentary thing, and it lacks context. It lacks connection. It just exists in itself. So the sort of data set we're talking about, what's unique is that you can start to essentially join the dots in terms of what I would say is behavior. And by behavior, I mean, it's not, were you there at that particular moment? Am I there to be targeted? What it's saying is the pattern of behavior that comes from that data talks about time and geography, and of course, content and behavior. So for example, what's the types of things that you might do? What's the type of thing that an audience do? If I'm looking for an audience for a key brand, where does it live? When does it do it? Not the individual, not the fact you were there once, not you bought once or you did it before. you and, as I say, your congregation, as it were, and if we were, let's take out of home, sort of good example, where and when might you find an audience? It might be that you're going to gear more towards commuters. And of course, that's got urban versus rural. It might have regional share around it. But it might be more, you're kind of more that socializing, that drinking type thing. And think about patterns of travel to and from. These are key behaviors that don't come from a point in time, point in space data point. They come from a continuous view of large volumes, large numbers of people brought together to explain the behavior, rather than I'm going to target you because I think I want to talk to you, which has got its own set of problems with it.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned a few things there that were very interesting. And I want to understand more about, in a world where the advertisers, can no longer look for the individual themselves, and they're actually looking to target, it's one-to-one, one-to-many. How has that changed the conversations that you're having with people about kind of what telco data and the data sets that you have access to can change the way that they can target? And you mentioned out of home is a really good example of that. Like how can telco data adapt the way that they would run an out of home campaign, for example?
Well, on the first point, I think what's sort of key here is that there's always been the perception that you always could do the former and now you want to do the latter because, again, back to that sort of death of cookie. I don't think that's true. I don't think you ever really could do the former properly. Because, in terms of opt-in data, okay, look, I understand that if you've got first-party data with an opt-in and you're able to market to that specific audience as individuals, fine. But that's not the case. That's not what we're talking about at all. You're talking about pieces of data that are thin on the ground and lack context. That's always been true before you can't even use the cookie anymore. So actually, the reason why the narrative has changed from our point of view is, and I think what's maybe been part of it is that, what Peter and I got in common is we're not from within the industry. I found myself coming into this industry, I've been about data. That has been the key thing. The use cases I've worked on have been different. So we've been able to come in and articulate it in some slightly different ways.
Interesting.
And, rather than talking about a marketing objective, generally we're talking about a strategic objective for a brand. Who do you want to reach? Who do you want to talk to? Who are you trying to find? And the key thing is that the advertisers that we speak to, and I'm talking advertisers at large, they get it. When I can say to you, I understand your audience, I possibly understand it a bit better than you do in some respects, but let me show you.
Yeah.
Not, there's a cookie, there's IDs, we'll target individuals, leave it to us. Let me show you. So in the example of out of home is that we can visualize it, we can bring the whole thing to life, we can back it up with sample sizes. It's all about high quality analytics, high quality data, high quality insights, and proving the story as we go. That's what's changed it, is that people can see it and they get it and they want to do it.
Yeah, very interesting. I want to change tack slightly, and I want to talk about the challenges around using telco data, especially from a compliance side. If you mention telco data to somebody, they're going to think, well, that's very, very rich. It's clearly, there's plenty of PII there. We know everything about a person based on telco data. How do you address those concerns with advertisers and help them understand how it's a safe data set to use, it's compliant, and there's so much you can do with it without having to worry about that kind of other side of things?
Well, of course, the telcos themselves share those concerns, and therefore the access to the data that they give us is fully compliant, it's fully anonymised because they have those issues. This is not about tracking individual people. And it's not about tracking individual people at a single point in time. It's about building a consensus from a large sample over a large amount of time, so we smooth out any of the day-to-day inconsistencies. So people who commute, for instance, they don't commute every day, but we'll know that they're a commuter because we'll look at their data day in, day out.
Yeah.
We'll build up a pattern of what do commuters look like, what do working from home people look like. And it's not about targeting individual people. So all of the data sets we used fully anonymised and fully compliant. And it's actually a really nice position to be in.
It's a great position to be in, and it's something that you can, quite easily and comfortably verify as well, which makes it, I guess, very exciting. I also want to ask you about the data and how it can be applicable to, I guess, current systems that are in place and kind of, how you can overlay it with other data and, running, for example, international campaigns, like how the data applies across different markets. Like, there's some uniqueness there, is there not, versus kind of other data sets that advertisers are using?
Well, there are. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we're just in the process of expanding out the business internationally, and creating much of the same answers. I mean, the one thing that I would say is that, I mean, our relationship with Telco here in the UK, and we announced a significant partnership with Virgin Media O2 this year. I mean, there's a little bit of legacy, partly because Petrie and I used to work for them, but that's not actually the key to how we've done what we've done. There's also attitudes towards this data in the UK. Like in France, for instance, they are still in a place where they just don't think they want to do this type of thing. That's the telco position.
I see, yeah.
So there is applicability, but actually, as I say, the key to this is the way we work with data in Skyrise. And look, we love data that comes from handsets because we believe that they express real behaviours, they express real things. That's not to say that we don't like GPS, it's not to say that we don't like card transaction data, but the principle is the same, is we're taking something that starts with an individual, has the PII removed, and again, it's really about insight and patterns that come from that. So for example, you sort of talk about out of home. I mean, we would be equally at home interpreting signals from card behaviour, because a card transaction, for example, compared to a telco web event, well, a web event might say that you've looked at, I don't know, let's say Uber Eats, something like that. Well, a card transaction would tell you that. What you want to know is where did it happen, and you want, again, it's that wider connection. So card transactions say you might have bought Uber, but a pattern of purchases will tell you what's the type of thing that you're interested in, what might you do. But also remember the location of those purchases, vendors, it sort of expresses patterns of movement, patterns of behaviour. So in terms of the international point, I mean, again, it absolutely plays in. We love telco data.
Yeah.
We have a global partnership with VMO2, which extends into Spain with Movistar and across Latin America, for example. So it does build from there. And again, it's all about interpreting and creating high quality analysis that can inform strategy that comes from those data signals and the way we do it.
Interesting. And I'm assuming that with telco data as well, because it's data that's being sourced through the telcos themselves and the infrastructure that exists within the telco network, that if there are any changes to what can be tracked, what can be sourced, etc., it means that you can update the data sets quite easily. You can improve targeting, increase options. There's probably a lot that can be done just with this one singular source of data.
Yeah, well, fortunately, the mobile infrastructure environment is extremely robust, and therefore it's not susceptible to a lot of change. And because telcos were some of the first people to recognise the monetary or the monetization element of their data, lots of the data that we have access to is now very, very stable. And it applies across countries, so we can source telco data in the UK and we can source it across Europe and other parts of the world, and we do. And it's very, very similar from a structure and content point of view. Of course, what differs is different regions, different environments have socio-demographic behaviours that vary wildly. Some countries that are first world countries and second world countries differ in their working patterns. They differ in handsets and what tariffs people have. So the actual data itself needs some interpretation, but from a structural point of view and from a network point of view, it's extremely robust.
That's really interesting.
And there are a number of benefits that come with that. So in some areas, that data can be incredibly recent, and we can have up-to-date data, but also there's a long history available to us, and seasonality is very important. So, summer, seasonality, summer, winter, etc.
So I can use that data, I can use historical data to inform an upcoming campaign, for example, and I could go back and look at trends over a number of years. You mentioned seasonality, the previous 5 summers, to be able to inform my campaign for this summer. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting.
Quite a common one that we do when we do audience builds is towards the end of the year, we'll quite often be asked to build the audiences built based on last year's data, like approaching Christmas, for example. I don't want to base my audience targeting on the months of August, September, October.
No, of course not.
let's go back to last Christmas and see what happened. So year on year is quite a common one as well. When we're talking about the sample size and we're talking about individual data and groups, I mean, I think there's always this sort of feeling about sample size. Well, what is it? If it's not an individual, is it 2, 3, or is it 5 or 10? That misses the point entirely. The thing about the data and its sample size is that, I mean, I could tell you that a very, very high percentage of your audience would exist, let us say, at Euston Station. Now, if for that to be true, and we talk about different data sets we use, remember, it doesn't just start with an insight.
Yeah.
That's a key point. That will actually probably talk about thousands of people, because it's true each day. It's not just a one-off within Euston Station. So what would we do with that? You've got to remember as well, within Skyrise, we're very good at using this data. So, we have a trading team. So we also then use the data about the inventory to say, well, what's the best part of the performance? Really, we're about effectiveness from that data. So if we're targeting Euston Station, well, what inventory will we buy? What price will we bid out? What will we do with it? How will we trade it? What specific times and what periods? You see, again, it's not so much about creating the answer. It's about creating the answer, being responsive to client briefs.
Yeah.
Then activating that, but then proving it. Effectiveness, measurement, and all the things that we do. That's the end-to-end aspect of the power of telco data when it's applied and used throughout the life cycle of the campaign.
Yeah, that's really the key. It isn't just about taking that telco data, building a few segments, and then basing a plan off that and stepping back from it. It's using it end to end. So we take the telco data in its raw form, we model it, we enrich it, we build intelligent campaigns off the back of that, we activate them well, and then we measure the effectiveness. And we can tie that back to the original telco data for measurement of effectiveness and success.
And do you find there is a lot of education required to potential clients, to understand the power and the richness of telco data versus what they're currently using and versus how they would currently use it to forecast a campaign, to map out a campaign, to work out what their target audience is? Do you think that is it quite an easy sell, or is it like, does it require some work to help them understand exactly what it can do and what the power of it is?
Well, selling is never easy.
No, that's very true.
Once said it was.
Selling is never easy.
No, but do you know what? It's in terms of convincing. I would not say it's challenging to convince.
Okay.
But the key is, remember, I'm back to this point about bringing it to life.
Yes.
So this is not a take our word for it. If I can build an audience for you, and I can then give you a size, a profile, a scale that matches your expectations, I can put it together in terms of maps and statistics about that. I can show that to you, and then I can take your requirements. Let's take something that we've got. I mean, we've got a really advanced media planning application. We call it Bid Plan, and this is for out of home. If I can then listen to you and you give me a budget, and you're telling me that I want to do a campaign that's based, let's say, more around reach than impact, and I can quantify the fact that I know where your audience is, I can show you the best inventory, and I can give you, first of all, what would the performance be if we hadn't done this? What is the performance going to be with us using this data? And then what is the actual performance when we've done it? If we can give you those three things together, there are very, very clear, quite grown up proof points.
That's very powerful.
Absolutely. And it's credible and it's believable because it's based on high quality data.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's completely transparent. I mean, obviously there's a degree of trust what we do and how we blend and what we do in our platform, but it's there to be seen. And that's what we're about in terms of proving what we do.
Brilliant. And so do you have any examples you can share of work you've done with clients that have been really interesting in kind of terms of how they've used this data to really inform a campaign?
A key part of what we deliver in post-campaign analysis and measurement is a bunch of reports that can explain what we do. I mean, the case studies that are available on our website, clearly show huge uplifts in terms of key metrics around purchases, or in the case of RSPCA, subscription increases in the exposed versus the control groups. So yeah, effectiveness is like absolutely the kind of cornerstone, if you like, to what we do with this.
Absolutely. And what would you say is, if anyone watching this that goes, right, I want to get involved, I want to start understanding how I can use telco data in my campaigns, what would you say is the first key thing to consider? What are the key considerations? And you can't say, call Skyrise.
Call Skyrise. I just did say it. No, you're right. I mean, perhaps the best answer to say is that, what we would do in terms of how we respond, I mean, perhaps we're no different to anyone else, but in terms of what we do, when we receive a brief, the first thing that we'll do is we'll build out that audience based on high quality signals. Those audiences are typically It might be based around your brand. A lot of them are around competitors. I want to conquest my market. It might be about matching a persona, or it might be very behavioural and based. The key step is that we will build out and prove the audience at the point of the initial conversation. So maybe it does involve calling Skyrise, but that will be the key part.
I think that's a point that's often overlooked. And being somebody new to the market, the competitor insight that we can give brands maybe is undervalued here, because having come from an insight background in other industries, being able to see which of your competitors your customers are visiting is just gold.
That's definitely gold. That's very powerful.
One of the key campaign sort of drivers that we do when we talk about conquest, I mean, again, we didn't invent the concept, I understand that, but when you put a robust data set at a low level of geometry, so let's say there's 50,000 targetable elements, well, there's two metrics that we want to know. First of all, what is your market share? Again, think about Weblog, we've got that, we can see that, at that individual level that we roll up into those geographies. And then what is the overall size? The key opportunity is where your market share is the lowest, but the market size, the opportunity is the largest. Those areas that become higher priorities in terms of targeting. And again, what inventory are you buying? How do we put that into the DSP? Well, that's the Skyrise way. That's what we do. And again, with very powerful proven outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. Thank you so much for coming in. It's been great to have you join us today in ExchangeWire HQ. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Alex and Pete. And call Skyrise.